الحمد لله الحمد لله دائما مع دوامك ولك الحمد خالدا مع خلودك ولك الحمد لا منتهى لها دون مشيتك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومطاعنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم حريص عليكم بالمؤمنين رؤوف رحيم صدق الله مولانا العظيم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Empathy is considered to be the highest human quality. What is empathy? Empathy is to emotionally understand what other people are feeling, to see things from someone else's perspective, and to actually put yourself in the other man's shoes. That is the definition of empathy. And the reality is that we as humans, 60% of our thoughts are self-directed. My problems, my situation, my life, my car, my house, my business. That is what is running through our minds all the time. 30% of our thoughts are towards our relationship with others. Our spouse, our children, our parents. But most of the time we're looking at it from the perspective of what does my wife think of me? What does my kids or my children think of me? What does my boss think about me? This one did this to me. This one said this about me. So even though we're thinking about our relationships, it's from our own perspective. And then 10% of our thoughts are directed towards empathy, towards other human beings, their suffering, their situation, what are their challenges. So we find that we become very self-absorbed in our own lives. And that is a major problem for us. It robs us of empathy. And that is the first thing, that we're so self-absorbed. That is why we cannot experience empathy for others. We do not feel those feelings. Also, many times we blame others. So if someone is in a particular predicament, we'll say that, you know what, he only has himself to blame for this. It's his own decisions. He did this, so he must bear the consequences. So we blame the person for their situation, and that is why we do not feel empathy for that person. Also, we find that it's a unique human tendency that sometimes we say things to solicit sympathy from others. One time I was sitting with some people, and one person was saying how much insulin he takes daily. And the other one said, that's nothing, I take double that. So they're competing in who's worse off, but wanting to be better in being worse off. That your situation is nothing, my situation is worse. So I should you should feel sympathy for me rather. And as a result of that, we don't feel empathy for one another. Also, as humans, we have the tendency to compete with one another. Al-hakumut takathur. It is a human tendency in the various stages of life. So when we're competing with one another, then we won't feel this quality of empathy for another person, because we're wanting to outdo that person. We consider that person as an adversary. We're wanting to be better than that person. And the net result of this is that when a person doesn't have empathy, then we are very critical and judgmental of others. We view everyone's behavior in a negative light. Sometimes it leads to us treating others badly, being critical, being judgmental, and also, not being kind and compassionate to others when we do not have empathy in our lives. When we are robbed of this quality, or we've done certain things that has resulted in us not experiencing empathy. While when we look at the life of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how Allah Rabbul Izzah describes Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Noble Quraan, Allah Rabbul Izzah says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ Azizun alayhi ma'anittum harisun alaykum bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. A messenger has come to you from amongst you. Azizun alayhi ma'anittum. Anything that is difficult for you is hard for him to bear. Meaning that he's so connected to each one of the ummatis that your challenges, it's hard for him to bear. Harisun alaykum. He is desirous of your good. Bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. Compassionate to the believers. That is the description of our Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is really the quality of empathy. That whatever difficulty anyone experienced at that time, it had an impact on the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In the hadith, the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, مَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي تَوَادِّهِمْ وَتَرَاحُمِهِمْ وَتَعَاطُفِهِمْ كَمَثَلِ الْجَسَدِ الْوَاحِدِ. The similitude of the believers in their mutual attachment, mutual compassion, mutual love for one another is like one body. If one part of the body is injured, the entire body feels the pain. If one ummati is experiencing one difficulty in the most remote part of the world, it affects every one of us, and we ought to feel the pain. So it's not just about, shame, that person. It's about actually feeling the pain of that person. And that is the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is where you feel sorry for the person. That person has a difficult circumstances, I feel sorry. And empathy is actually feeling the pain of that person. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. You have not perfected your iman until you love for your fellow Muslim what you love for yourself. And that is the gauge, that what I love for myself, that is what I should love for others. How I would like to be treated, that is how I should treat others. And when we look at the various references in the life of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there was one occasion where the Ra'isul Munafiqeen, the leader of the hypocrites, whose name was Ubay bin Sulul, before Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had migrated to Madinatul Munawwara, he had entertained this desire that he would be the king of the city, Yathrib. With Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam coming to Madinatul Munawwara, he lost out in that sense, that it wasn't going to happen. He then pretended to be a Muslim, but at heart he was a kafir. So he fraternized with the Muslims, he entered their circles, he would go with them on the expeditions, but at all times in his heart he was plotting and planning their downfall. And he would say things that were hurtful to the believers. He was the one who initiated the slander against Sayyidah Aisha Radiyallahu Anha. And we know how much pain that caused Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Muslimin at large. His son Abdullah was a genuine believer, a sincere Muslim, who knew what was the position of his father. His father was a munafiq, but he didn't have any influence over his father. His father remained as a munafiq and he was a Muslim. His father then passed away. Abdullah comes to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and tells Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, informs him that my father has passed away. At that moment, the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam takes off his kurta that he's wearing and he gives it to Abdullah and tells Abdullah that bury your father with this kurta. The very man who caused so much taklif and trouble to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, at that point Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam could have told him that, look, your father is a non-Muslim, he's going to rot in the grave. He's going to Jahannam. You cannot make dua for him. All of that is in its place. But at this point, when Abdullah came before Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he came as a son mourning the death of his father. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam viewed it in that particular light, that here's a son who has lost his father. His father is a non-Muslim. His father is a disbeliever, the worst of them. Yet I need to comfort him. If I make dua, it won't make a difference because it's not going to change his faith. So the one thing that I can do to bring comfort to his heart is to give him my kurta and say, bury him with this kurta. So looking at his perspective, Abdullah's perspective of a son mourning the loss of his father, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam treated him in that particular light. That's why they say that, empathy has no script. It's about connecting with the heart. Connecting with the heart. We all know Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, جُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. The coolness of my eyes is in salah. You can imagine the joy, the elation, the jubilation, the ecstasy that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam experienced in his salah, in the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He loved salah. And the hadith it says, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, إِنِّي لَأَقُومُ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ or أَقُومُ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. I'm in salah and I stand up. وَأُرِيدُ أَنْ أُطَوِّلُ الْقِرَاءَةِ. And I want to read long portions of the Noble Quraan, because there's so much joy and so much fulfillment in that. وَأَتَجَوَّزُ فِي صَلَاتِي كَرَاهِيَةَ أَنْ أَشُقَّ عَلَى أُمٍّ. And I shorten my salah because I hear a child crying at the back, and I do not want to make it difficult for the mother. And I do not want to make it difficult for the mother, because the mother is in salah and the baby is crying. Now the mother is wanting to pacify the baby. By me lengthening the salah, it will cause difficulty to the mother. So this is obviously, there is the sunnah qira'ah, which we are aware of in the Fajr Salah from Surah Hujurat till Surah Infitar, Surah Idha Saman Fatarat, and then Isha and the Asr Salah from Surah Wail Mutaffifin up until Lam Yakun. There's some differences and these shorter. So within that frame to read, that is the Sunnah Qiraat. But under the circumstances, despite the desire to lengthen the Salah, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam looks at his own desire on the one hand, and what is the circumstances of a mother right at the back, and he adjusts his behavior accordingly. So at one instance in the time of the Khilafah of Mutawakkil, a case was brought to him that a man by the name of Ubadah smacked the Imam. So Mutawakkil called up the man, Ubadah, and he said that, I heard you smack the Imam. If you don't give me a good reason why you smacked the Imam, then I'm going to give you a very severe punishment. So the man said, okay, listen to my explanation. He says, I was traveling by and I came by a masjid and it was Fajr Salah time. The Azan was given and then the Iqamah was given and then the Imam started the Salah. So I said, okay, let me just join the Salah here. And the Imam stood up and he started his recitation with Surah Fatiha and he started reading Surah Baqarah. And he started reading and he was reading and reading, one ruku, two rukus, and he continued in that way. And Ubadah, the man, says that when I heard him reading Surah Baqarah, I thought to myself that he'll read a few verses or a few rukus and then he'll go into ruku and then we'll complete the Salah. But he continued and continued and continued until he read the entire Surah Baqarah. Then he went into ruku and he went into sajda. While in ruku and sajda, the man says, I was thinking to myself that in the second rakat, he's definitely reading Surah Ikhlas. Because he's now read such a long rakat. He stands up for the next rakat and after reading Surah Fatiha, he starts Surah Al Imran. He says, I'm dumbfounded this time. I say, okay, perhaps he'll read a few rukus from Al Imran and then he'll go into ruku. But he doesn't read a few rukus, he reads the entire Al Imran. And then he goes into ruku, and then he goes into sajda, and he completes his salah. And Ubadah is explaining, he says that after he makes the salam, he turns around and he says that A'idu salatakum fa inni lam akum ala tahurin. He says that he turns around and he made salam, and it was just about before the sun was about to rise, and he looks at us and he says, repeat your salah because I didn't have wudu. He says, I stood up and I gave him one smack. Mutawakkil says, he started laughing and he says, he deserved the smack. So, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would lengthen the salah, and that was his desire. But he would adjust his behavior when there was someone that would be in some way affected by that. And that is the empathy that we're talking about. At the time of the conquest of Makkah al-Mukarramah, there was the enemy of the deen of Islam, Ikramah, who was the son of Abu Jahl, Amr ibn Hisham. They call him Abu al-Hakam, we call him Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance. He was initially on the list of people who were not given any amnesty. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam first said, if you find him, even if he's holding on the Kaaba, he should be executed. Because the animosity that he bared towards the deen of Islam and the legacy that he continued of his father of animosity to the Muslims. So he then fled. His wife remained behind in Makkah al-Mukarramah. She then came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and sought amnesty for her husband. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam granted it. He then went towards Yemen, and on his journey towards Yemen, he came across a river, and in the river, he was traveling and some bad weather, and the captain of the boat told him that, Akhlis, be sincere. So he said that, what do you mean? So he said, say La ilaha illallah. So Ikramah says, that is the very thing I ran away from. I will never say that now. Anyway, he reaches his destination, or he had to turn back, and there he meets his wife, who came after him. And his wife says that I've got amnesty for you from the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I want you to come back to Makkah al-Mukarramah and meet Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he then, after much persuasion, he then takes the journey from where he was to Makkah al-Mukarramah. Now here's the reference that I'd like to make to the story. As he is coming, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam addresses the Sahaba and he says to them, Ya'tikum Ikramah. Ikramah is coming to you. Mu'minan muhajiran. As a believer, making hijrat for the sake of Allah. And then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, La tasubbu abahu. فَإِنَّهُ يُؤْذِي الْحَيِّ وَلَا يَبْلُغُ الْمَيِّتِ. Don't tell him anything about his father, Abu Jahl. Because you're going to tell him, hey, your father was like this, your father was like that, he was the greatest enemy, where is he today, he's disgraced. Yu'dil hay, it will cause hurt to his heart. And it will do nothing to Abu Jahl. So be considerate of his feelings at this time. On the one hand, all that Abu Jahl and Ikramah did to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam over the period of, say, more than 20 years almost. And on the other hand, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is preparing the Sahaba. That here's a person who is coming, and we all have strong emotions with regards to him and his father in the legacy. But let our emotions not get the better. Be considerate to him. Be welcoming to him. Accept him in. This is that empathy, that immediately turning the scale and saying, what can we do? How can we look at the situation from his perspective? And that is what we require. So how do we adopt empathy? The first point is that, as humans, the most difficult thing for us is to listen to others. We all want to say our say. We want to put our point of view. The biggest complaint in the work in civil society, we need to be heard. We're not being heard. So sometimes what we just need to do is to slow down and listen to what the other person is saying. Just listen to what he's saying. We have 2 ears and 1 tongue. That's why we should be doing more listening than talking. So that is the first point. Always listen intently to what the person is saying. The second is that we are judgmental. That when we hear something, even if you don't say it, but in your heart you've already formed a judgment about it, and it manifests through your body language. So you shouldn't be judgmental when listening. The youngster came to the masjid and he said to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, "O Nabi Allah, give me permission to commit zina." Imagine a youngster walking in here. People will feel embarrassed. Someone will want to take him out and push him out. Someone will want to assault him and say, you got no respect. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam called the youngster closer. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to him, or asked him the question, that would you like that this be done with your mother? He said, no. Would you like that this be done with your sister? He said, no. Would you like that it be done with your daughter? He said, no. Would you like that it be done with your aunt? He said, no. Then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, any lady that you commit this zina with would be someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's aunt. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam then called him forth, put his hand Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam put his blessed hand on this youngster's chest and said, Allahumma hassin farjahu waghfir dhanbahu. Oh Allah, protect him, his chastity, and forgive his sins. And this youngster was such that he says there was nothing more detestable to him ever after that than zina. He didn't want to hear the word of zina. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used empathy to direct the person. By just telling him, zina is haram. Don't you know you'll get stoned if you commit zina? It is the worst crime. A person will be killed in the most heinous manner. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam called him forth, explained to him, turned the table on him, let him understand from different angles, and then use that to direct him. And that is where he found his direction. So that is what is required. The second thing is not to be judgmental of the person. The third is, in every situation, try to find, when you're dealing with someone, or there's certain circumstances that come about, if you put yourself or recall when you were in a similar situation, that then creates that feelings of empathy. And the one incident that comes to mind, it's a famous incident where there was a man who came out of a well and he saw a dog, and the dog was panting with thirst. And he thought to himself that this dog is experiencing the same level of thirst that I had. So he went back in the well and took out water for the dog and gave the dog the water to drink. And Allah forgave the person because of that action. What did he do? He linked the thirst of the dog to his own thirst. And he said that I was very thirsty. And how did I feel at the time? This is the creation of Allah, a dog. And I can imagine now how thirsty the dog is. And therefore, he took the effort to remove his boot and take out water from the well and then gave it to the dog. So that is the third point. That always link circumstances that others are experiencing to something that you may have experienced. And that will then create those feelings of empathy. And the fourth point here is to look at things from different perspectives. When you look at things from different perspectives, the moment you ask yourself that, what if this person is right, what he's saying? What if I'm wrong? There's always a possibility. What if I know that he or she is trying their best? It creates that empathy within us. There's a story that has been narrated by one of the motivational speakers in their book. And they say that on the subway of New York, on a Sunday morning, there was a very relaxed atmosphere in the train. People were commuting to their destination. Some of the passengers were dozing off, others were reading the newspaper, and all involved in their own activity. And everybody waiting to get off at the next destination. Then the doors of the train opened. Some passengers left, some came on. And a father with several children came onto the train. And within a few moments after the father came on, the peace, the very harmonious atmosphere on the train was changed. The kids, some were running down the aisle, others were jumping on the seats, they were wrestling each other, they were, creating huge chaos on the train. Those who were the passengers who were there were starting to get irritated. Nudging each other. This is a weak father. He doesn't know how to discipline. He hasn't brought up his kids nicely. How can he do this to us? Disturbed all the chaos on the peace on the train. And everybody started thinking and entertaining these thoughts and whispering it to one another. Eventually, one well-dressed businessman goes up to the father and grabs him by his jacket and says that, do you see what your kids are doing? You've got to do something about it. And the father slowly looks up and tells him, yes, I've got to do something about it, but I just don't know what to do. We've just come from the hospital, and 1 hour ago we received the news that their mother passed away. And when he said that, all the passengers on the train who heard the answer, the whole atmosphere changed. And they were all experiencing antagonism. They were feeling hostile, they were feeling agitated. But the moment they heard that these kids that are entertaining themselves lost their mother, now they felt sympathy. Now they were sorry for them. It's no problem. They can continue, come jump here, giving them a sweet. The whole attitude changed. And it was just one bit of information that was hidden from them prior to this. But once that information became revealed to them, their attitude changed. And in life, that is the case. One of the thinkers of the past said that when you read the secret history of even your enemies, you'll find such sorrow and such suffering that will disarm all your hostility. When you read the secret history of even your enemies, you'll find such sorrow and suffering that will disarm all your hostility. So sometimes you see someone's behavior, someone did something to you, and you analyze it on the outward. But there may be some circumstances in his or her life that if you come to know about that, you'll be able to tolerate the behavior. Suddenly you'll find within you that the behavior is acceptable. And that is what we're talking about. That in essence, empathy is to hear with the eyes of others, to see with the eyes of others, and to feel with the eyes of others. And what we've been speaking about is that empathy is the highest human quality. There are certain things that are blocking us from empathy, and we need to adopt it by listening, by not being judgmental, by recalling circumstances that we were in a similar situation, and by just changing the perspective and looking at things from another person's perspective. To sum it up, empathy is the medicine that the world needs. And sometimes you can just display it by asking someone that is everything okay. May Allah Rabbul Izzah give us the ability to adopt this beautiful quality. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.